Now, the Black Business Council says black economic empowerment remains a relevant policy in South Africa, while participation in the economy is unequal. Speaking at a webinar on the COVID-19 Business Rescue Assistance Task Team, Council President Sandile Zungu says there can be no fundamental redress in South Africa if the policy is abolished. Now, this comes after the issue of race featured prominently at the Democratic Alliance's policy conference and in the wake of public outcry over a racist hair product advert that was carried by Click. Sandile Zungu joins us now as we continue to unpack this issue. Sandile, good morning. Thanks for your time on the AM report. I mean, BEE always gets a bad rap, and it's because of how it's been implemented, cadre deployment being one of the issues that contribute to the bad reputation that BEE does get. But what is the alternative?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. Cadre deployment is not part of BEE. It never was, it never will. Broad-based black economic empowerment is broad-based simply because it talks about ownership, that it has to shift to be demographically representative of South Africa, the management of the economy, both at senior level as well as medium management level. It talks about enterprise development, talks about affirmative procurement, and talks about community social investments, among other tenets of broad-based black economic empowerment. You can see, if you look at it in a comprehensive fashion, the issue of abandoning it doesn't make any sense at all, because this is part of a negotiated package that talked about political freedom in a peaceful manner, that we achieved it, but at the same time ensuring that economic justice prevails in a reasonable space of time. We're highly critical that it's taken this long for meaningful empowerment to really happen. Just to quote one or two statistics, black South Africans make up more than 90% of the South African population, if you include Indian South Africans as well as colored South Africans and Africans. Yet, if you look at the supervisory levels or management levels in South Africa, Africans specifically make up less than 16%. White South Africans, who make up only 8% of the population, make up almost 2/3 of managerial levels in South Africa. You cannot call that justice, and you cannot even fathom to think that it's time we abandon black economic empowerment when there are such anomalies at managerial level. Yeah. When we talk about ownership, it's even worse. That JSE own records, even if they exclude ownership by foreigners, even if they exclude ownership by large pension funds, black South Africans still constitute a minority of ownership of the JSE. By our own standards, as a Black Business Council, black ownership in the JSE, if you include every other excluded categories like big pension funds and foreign ownership, make up less than 10%. That's economic injustice proper, 101. So we cannot talk about abandoning black economic empowerment when the statistics are so starkly against abandonment. Yeah. What we need to talk about instead is how do we tweak it to work? How do we ensure that we deepen the entrepreneurial culture, especially among young people? Remember that there are people who were born post-1994 who don't really know much about apartheid, and who, when they enter the world of entrepreneurship, all they want is to start businesses. They want access to funding. They want access to markets. They don't want to buy equity from white owners or white families. They want to start their own businesses. By the way, that still falls firmly within the realm of black economic empowerment. It's not just about taking shares from a white family or from a large enterprise and giving it to black people. It's also about starting businesses, but ensuring that there is access to capital, access to markets.
You know, Sandile, it's so interesting to hear you talk about the numbers as we unpack the issue of BEE, and we look at it through the lens of some of the headlines that have been in the news over the past couple of weeks. And in my introduction, I talked about, the DA's first policy conference and the fact that it wants to move away from race as a way of redress. And I spoke to the Institute of Race Relations on this very issue, and it continues to talk about a widening group of black middle class that is the reason why we can now move away from race as the main reason and the main target of redress, the main indicator, as Musi Maimane said, of disadvantage in the country. Is it possible to talk about BEE not being the way to redress because there is a widening black middle class?
Well, it's wishful thinking on the part of those that want BEE to be abandoned, and it's wishful thinking on their part that will forget about race in terms of South African categorization. This is a bequeathment. It's an endowment that we got from colonial and apartheid masters who lived with racial categorization, racial subjugation for centuries. We talk about 26 years of democracy, and we're now talking about abandoning it. It's wishful thinking. Trust me, in our heart of hearts, even as advocates of black ethnic empowerment, we wish that one day race will not matter. But it's not an economic reality right now. It's a bequeathment, a horrible bequeathment by the apartheid and colonial dispossessors that we are in the space that we're in. So forget it. We have tasted what can be done. We have tasted what can be achieved. All we're angling for is that this system needs to be improved so that it works for those who are the intended beneficiaries. And at the same time, it encourages investment in our economy. And at the same time, it deepens the entrepreneurial culture, especially among young people, especially those who are born post-apartheid, who will propel us into the future. That's what really matters. The issue of being idealistic in the face of very stark reality is not something that we as a Black Business Council entertain.
So this is one of the main criticisms of BEE that you've just mentioned now, the fact that it doesn't work for those who are the intended beneficiaries. How do we now ensure going forward that that is the case? What are the policies that we need?
Well, I think let's first admit that the policy broad-based black economic empowerment is operating at a suboptimal level. That's a concession that we are prepared to make, and therefore changes have to be made. Number one, ensure that there is access to capital. The agencies which are supposed to play their part and who pleaded for the Charter, Financial Services Charter, made certain commitments about making available capital for those who want to own businesses. I don't think they've actually been true to their own commitments. I'm talking about big banks. They need to ask themselves, do some introspection. Have they really made available capital that is in their balance sheets to deepen participation by black people in the economy? So if it's not working in the space of access to capital, the answer lies in that door. The development finance institutions, I don't think they've been genuinely supportive of black economic empowerment. There's talk of black industrialist program. I know the minister will be able to give us statistics that are quite impressive, but on the ground, the efficacy of black industrialists is not truly appreciated, is not seen as having evidence of success. Again, DFIs. What role are they playing in terms of access to capital? Why it's also not working is that black economic empowerment players establish businesses, but they cannot access markets. Who are the markets? It's government. There's talk of doing away with the triple PFA. It's in the process of being replaced by the public procurement bill, which is under public debate. A closing date for remarks has come and passed. We need the government or the president to sign that to law. because it actually enables government to be a major player in creating markets for black products and services, as well as multinationals. If you look at the auto sector, for example, just to cite one example, Toyota or BMW, when they set up plant in Pretoria or in Prospecting, they come with their own supply chain players to be around them on the just-in-time basis. The role for new entrants in the auto space is very limited, especially black players, especially South Africans. We believe they need to open up those markets for local products and services. Yeah. If you look at multinationals who come into South Africa, make massive acquisitions, and then they force suppliers to supply them on a 180-day payment basis. Who in his right mind will supply a global giant only to be paid in 180 days? You are killing entrepreneurship, yeah. You are killing small, medium enterprises, and you are killing black business. So when you talk about things not working, it's at that level. So it's very lazy for people to then say, oh no, it's not working because it's benefiting a few players. That's very lazy thinking. They must go deeper to understand what are the complex issues that make BE to not work. It's at the level of access to capitals, level of access to markets, among others. Of course, we'll also do our introspection to ensure that black people who want to be players must think about being in it for the long haul. Business is a long game. It's not a short game. And they must make sure that they build new capacity for industrial capability in South Africa, rather than just being interested in acquiring shares from erstwhile owners. So if that was to be addressed in a systematic fashion with a great deal of patience and support from all the role players, trust me, we'll look back and say this was a wonderful success that South Africa had for the world.
Sandile Zungu, as always, a pleasure talking to you. He is the president of the Black Business Council as we continue to unpack the importance of BEE as an economic policy in South Africa.